I'm originally from California, and a couple of years ago I was laid off from my job. I decided my best option would be to use my savings to buy a house in a mid-sized town in the Midwest. I found a new job that paid enough to cover a mortgage, and I decided to go for it. Before moving, I wanted to travel a bit. So, one night while overseas, I found myself searching Zillow. I still had about a month left on my lease in California, but I found the perfect house. It was one town over from where my sister, her husband, and my young nephew lived, and just as importantly, it was within my budget. Being impatient, I asked my sister to go over and look at the house for me. She did. She even FaceTimed me while she was there and showed me all around. I absolutely loved it. I made an offer that honestly was significantly under asking price, just to see if they would counter and I could perhaps get a better deal. I was shocked when my offer was almost immediately accepted. Unbelievable joy was what I was experiencing in my hotel room that night. I was so excited to move, so pumped to start a new adventure. I finished out my lease in California and moved across country, headed to my new home. The first night I was there, I had very little with me. I had ordered a few pieces of furniture that my sister had assisted with being delivered. So I had a couch, a couple of side tables, but other than that, nothing had been built. I slept on a mattress on the floor since I hadn't assembled my bed frame yet. And after a long day of everything that goes into a big move, I was completely exhausted. I found myself on the brink of sleep when I heard what I can only characterize as a banging noise coming from upstairs. I found that incredibly strange because it's a one-story house. Snapping out of my near-dream state, I quickly remembered that houses in the Midwest have attics and sometimes basements. I wasn't used to this, coming from a small apartment in California. I thought about going to check out the noise, but thinking that it may have been a small animal that I wasn't ready to deal with, I decided to just let it be for the night and look into it in the morning. But shortly thereafter, I heard another bang, this time much louder than before. The thought that it could have been an animal was now draining from my body. After a few moments of silently listening, the bang changed into a scuttling sound. It actually almost sounded like a set of muffled footsteps. Fear had absolutely taken hold of me at this point. I grabbed my phone and flipped on the flashlight. I went to the part of the hallway where there was access to the attic and saw that my attic door, the thing I'd have to pull down to get the ladder to drop, wasn't completely closed. I knew then that I wasn't going to explore any more of my new house by myself. So, I went straight back to my room, locked the door, and kept the lights on. Now, part of me knew that I should have just left then, but another part of me thought that I was being ridiculous. Whatever was up there, it wasn't what my mind was telling me it was. There had to be some logical explanation aside from there being some hidden person in my attic. After all, my sister had looked at the house, and when I was on video with her, she had gone into the attic. We both saw that it was absolutely empty. And since then, the house had been closed and locked up tight. I told myself that I was safe if I just stayed in my room with the light on and stayed awake. I did, for a while at least, and didn't hear any further noises. I guess I fell asleep at some point because I woke up with a start a few hours later, just as dawn was beginning to crack outside. However, what had woken me up was a noise, something loud, something heavy, and it came from my living room. Instinctively, which it had to have been because I was still half asleep, I ran to the main room of the house and saw that one of my end tables was now halfway across the room, in addition to my front door being wide open. I stepped just to the edge of the door and peered out, seeing a dark figure now probably about half a block away, running in the opposite direction of my home. Whoever that was, they were in my house only a moment before. And from the looks of it, they had kicked my table on their way out. That was the sound that I heard. I yanked the door shut, grabbed my phone once more, this time calling the police. When they arrived, an officer went up into the attic and found food wrappers, an ice chest, a pile of dirty blankets, and a bucket filled with human waste. Someone had been living there for what looked like quite a while. That officer and his partner informed me that this wasn't the first time that they had been to my house. The previous owners had a daughter who was not well and had gotten in trouble with the law quite often. The family had moved because the neighbors kept calling the police on them for screaming, fighting, and other odd things happening in the house involving the daughter. The cops said that they believed she was either bipolar or was schizophrenic and had been known to be violent. This next bit, it took them a while to actually say, which put me even more on edge. They told me that they thought it might have been the daughter in the attic. This wasn't exactly something they could prove on the spot. They didn't find any identifying evidence in the house. No journals, no old photos, nothing like that. But what they were saying made a bit of sense. They alluded to the fact that she may not have wanted to move when her parents decided to sell the house, and being someone that grew up in the home, maybe she knew a way to get in without breaking the window. Or perhaps she even still had a key from before the locks were changed. To this day, if it was her, I don't know how she got in, how long she was there before me, and how this whole thing would have played out had she not decided to just leave. I remember thinking back and finding it curious that the sellers accepted an offer way under asking price, but it makes much more sense if they were motivated to sell, and getting out as quickly as possible was their main motive. It just seems like they were the ones ready to leave, likely much more than their daughter. I still live in the house today, but there are times where I get creeped out at night. Sometimes I'll hear sounds, usually something benign, wind whipping my plants against the window or the foundation of my house creaking. I'll quickly calm myself and catch my bearings, but for a moment, a short, fleeting blip, I'll remember that someone had been living in my attic when I moved in, and I'll find myself wondering, are they back? This is a story that I'd like to share because it's something that I can't seem to shake from my mind. My hope is that someone here can offer me some ideas of what happened so that I feel secure in the fact that I'm not losing my mind. I'm a 31-year-old female who happens to live alone. I'd been a bit lonely and depressed of late, so when a girlfriend of mine asked me to go to the opening of a new local bar with her, I jumped at the opportunity. I needed to get out, to be social, and to just enjoy a night. So it's Friday evening. She picks me up at my place, and off we went to this downtown bar that was probably no more than about 10 minutes from my front door. We landed, had a few drinks, and now that we were nice and loose, decided to get up and dance. As we were leaving our table, a group of guys asked if they could take the table over since the place itself was pretty crowded and there were no others open. We gladly gave them the table and hit the dance floor. A few songs in, I did the patented pocket pat down, only to realize that I didn't have my phone with me. Thinking that I had left it on the high top we had just left, I went back to the table and was surprised that it was nowhere to be found. The guys who were now stationed there also said that they hadn't seen any phone when they set their drinks down, so that was a bust. The only other place that I had been while inside of the bar was the bathroom, so my friend and I checked there. Still no luck. I asked my friend if I could use her phone to call mine. She, of course, let me. I input my number and hit the green dial button, hoping with every bit of me that I would hear my ringtone bouncing off the linoleum tiles of the ladies' room, when after 2 rings, someone answered. I heard the click of the other line, but nothing was said. I, out of habit, said, "Hello?" but all I heard on the other end was a single heavy breath before the call disconnected. I must have phoned myself 15 more times over the next 20 minutes or so, but whoever had my phone never answered again. I eventually gave up the search, and while disappointed that I'd need to drop nearly a whole paycheck on another phone, I decided to cut my losses and head home. My friend dropped me back at my house. I slid my keys into the front door lock, pushed open my door, and headed straight for my room. I was ready to get out of my club clothes and put this night behind me when, out of the corner of my eye, I see my phone still plugged into the charger on the nightstand next to my bed. I then remembered that that's indeed where I left it. My friend had texted me that she was outside of my house to pick me up earlier in the night. I had texted her back saying that I was coming out, and I guessed that I never slipped my phone into my purse. So that answers where my phone had been all night. But what it didn't answer was, who had answered my phone when I first called? I stood there in a stupor for a few moments before my brain came up with all these different explanations. Maybe I had dialed the wrong number, but that couldn't have been. I know my number by heart, and if I had repeatedly called some stranger, they likely would have told me that I had the wrong number. Perhaps the lines were crossed, but then I realized that I don't even know what that means. It's only something that I heard said in old TV shows and movies. And that's when it came to me. Someone had been in my house. This sent a shiver down my spine that felt like 1,000 ice cubes rolling down me. I looked around my room, seeing that nothing was out of place. Nothing was missing. I grabbed the softball bat out of my closet and began to walk around my house, purposefully making my presence known with loud clumps and letting the bat trail behind me. I figured that if someone were still there, I might be able to scare them off by sounding like I meant business. I called out a few times, heard nothing. I went from my room to the kitchen, to the bathroom, to the back hallway, every step of the way peeking around corners, making sure things were locked. And that's when I get to the door at the very rear of my house. This particular door has 2 locks, one on the handle and the other above the handle that acts as a bolt. The handle lock can be engaged while the door is open, allowing you to lock the door and close it behind yourself as you walk out. The bolt, though, can only be engaged with a key from the outside, and I make it a habit to lock both of these religiously. So when I saw that only the handle lock was in place, it confirmed that someone else had been in my house. It was my phone that they answered. After this realization, I continued my sweep. Nobody was there anymore. But now I'm still left wondering, why would someone break in and not take anything? No laptop, no cash, no personal items. Why come in? Why walk around? And for God's sake, why answer the phone? This is an incident that occurred when I was around 9 years old. Even today, I still find myself thinking about what could have been. As a child, both my parents worked full-time, and sometimes they couldn't afford or find a babysitter for when I was off of school. Think winter, spring, summer breaks. So, oftentimes I would be home alone until one of them returned from work. There were 2 main rules. 1, never answer the door. 2, don't play too close to the windows, just in case someone is watching. Well, I was 100% guilty of hanging out near the window. I liked the lighting, and I was a bored kid when I was home alone. Come on, no one had ever knocked on the door before while I was alone, so I expected that pattern to always persist. One day, my father leaves for work, and he goes over the rules once again, things that I've heard 1,000 times before. Well, after a few hours of playing near the window, someone knocks on the door. I freeze, all but hit the deck, and I don't answer. But shortly thereafter, they knock again. And at this point in my little mind, I'm thinking that it has to be someone I know. That's the reason they're knocking twice. So I walk my little self over to the door, unlock it, and answer. I open the door to an intimidating woman standing there. She's about my parents' age, tall like my dad, broad-shouldered, wearing a hat with an American flag on it and holding a clipboard. She looked very official to a child. Before even greeting me, she asks, "How old are you?" I lie and say that I'm 12. She says that she's from some institution that I can't remember, and she tells me, "You're a liar. You're home alone and it's illegal. You're gonna have to come with me now. Let's go," before grabbing me by my arm and yanking me from my doorway. I immediately start crying loudly because I'm scared to get my parents in trouble. And after all, this woman is an adult. She must be right? I almost went with her. I have to be about 5 steps out into the hallway of our apartment when I start crying even louder. I'm not sure what it was, but at this point, we both hear a noise coming from one of my neighbors down the hall. This sends a jolt through the lady. She lets go of my sleeve and says, "Never mind, it's okay. You don't have to come with me," before she gave me a light shove back towards my house and walked off down the hall towards the stairs. The stairs in my apartment were set up like this. 6 stairs going down, a landing where you'd have to spin a 180-degree turn to get to the next 6 steps. The last that I ever saw of this woman, it was when she was making that 180. She sent a final cold glare right through me. It felt like her eye beams knocked me firmly back into my apartment. I slammed the door shut, locked it, and found myself cowering behind our couch. At this time, my parents weren't doing well financially, so we didn't have a landline at home. Cell phones? Not in 1996. I couldn't call my family, couldn't call 911. I waited the entire day for my dad to come back home. Looking back, I can only assume that that woman knew that I was alone because she had been watching me, whether it was just from a few hours that day or whether she had been scoping me out for a longer period of time. I don't think I'll ever know. I never really spoke on the incident because I felt like it was my fault for breaking the rules. And I often find myself thinking about just how lucky I am that she didn't get me down the stairs and force me to leave with her. Moral of the story, and I know that times have changed, but all of us 90s kids out here can certainly attest to this. Respect rule number 1, never ever answer the door.